Morning, my brothers and sisters. Welcome to episode number 45 in the book of Genesis. Today we're going to learn about the Nephilim, and that is an angelic class. At least I'll make that argument that comes to intermarry with humanity. It's a very interesting story from Genesis chapter 6. We've been studying early human history right around the time of Noah. And now we're going to find that it seems to be muddled with a spiritual being called the Nephilim, their history as well. And there's this interaction between these two species, if you will, humanity and perhaps an angelic species. That interaction is going to displease the Lord. This is from Genesis chapter 6. When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God, that might be this angel class, saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives as they chose. Then the Lord said, "My spirit shall not abide in man forever." So God is seeing all this and not liking it. For he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. Up to this point, mankind has lived hundreds and hundreds of years, like 900 years has been about average. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards when the sons of man came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men of old, the men of renown, the men of renown. Verse 5, the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. All right, so let me make a couple of points here, and then we'll get to talk about whether these are angels or not. Point number one is the daughters of man were attractive. Well, there's a whole industry about that, fashion, beauty, advertising, so that's an easy point. Number two, that we're heading to this moral decline in God's judgment. So the marriage between these sons of God and the daughters of men was part of this moral decline. So God did not like what was happening and described here today. Point number three is that God is witnessing. He is watching all this. He's regarding and judging and assessing, and that is his right. Point number four is we got to throw in marriage here, is because there's this divine pattern for marriage, and this, what we're describing here today, this is not it. Point number five is there's this population growth, which is godly. He said earlier, have dominion, grow and have dominion. That's a godly thing. However, there's also a growth of this wickedness, and eventually this wickedness, as we're seeing here right now, it's going to require God's intervention. So there's more to life and pleasing God than just the quantity of people. There's a moral component. It's the quality of people, living right, yielding to him, obeying his principles, and for example here in marriage. So these marriages led to wickedness. So just because you call it a marriage doesn't mean that God is in it, that God ordains it, or that it's in God's marital order. So let's talk about the Nephilim here. So there's kind of two big arguments. One is that these are human. The other is that they're angelic. I'm going to make the argument that they're angelic because of what the New Testament seems to say about them. So the human argument is that these are human judges or rulers, or maybe that they're sons of Seth and they resulted in these mighty men of renown, or that they're perhaps Cain's people. Let me make the argument, though, that these sons of God were angels. Now, fallen angels judged angels and condemned angels. So we know a couple things about angels. We know that angels have free will. We know that they're all male. And once they fall, they're not redeemable, which is also going to be seen in a couple of our passages. So apparently what happened is there's this defiance, and the angels leave their appointed realm, a heavenly realm, a divine sphere, and come into the human sphere and marry and maybe even molest. These are not sanctioned marriages or unions between these divine beings, angels, and daughters of man. This sexual union that eventually takes place results in the strongest penalties of God. We'll get to that. One other argument for the angelic realm is that this has been the traditional opinion by Christendom for a long time. I think the strongest arguments are in 1 Peter. In 1 Peter 3:18 it says, "For Christ also suffered once for sin, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit, in which he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison, because they formerly did not obey, when God's patience waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were brought safely through the water." So I think that refers to a period of time, which is it's like time stamped to Noah, where angels did not obey, and that their punishment, the punishment that was contemporarily uh, uh, put forth by God, not at some distant date, but they were punished at that time. Then 2 Peter chapter 2 verse 4 also mentions, "For if God did not spare the angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until judgment, if he did not spare in the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a herald of righteousness, with 7 others, when he brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly." So apparently here in 2 Peter it mentions a time where God is judging angels and punishing and casting them to hell and gloom and kept for the final judgment, but also God is preserving Noah, who's this herald of righteousness. So God's assessment is not sparing, not preserving, is punishing, and identifies fallen angels, angelic sin, angelic punishment, angelic imprisonment, angels in hell, and disobedient angels. And then finally in Jude, "And the angels who did not stay within their own position of authority, but left their proper dwelling, and he is kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day." So something there in Jude is this angelic world, time stamped to Noah. God punishes it where they leave their normal realm and come down to some realm they're not supposed to be in. So this results in a very strong response to God, from God, that we'll talk about tomorrow. So let me make some conclusions here today. Number 1 is, don't mess with marriage. Don't mess with the marriage bed, the sanctity, the holiness, the design, and the product of marriage. So not all marriages are looked upon as wonderful. So they're seen and assessed and judged now, just like they're seen and assessed and judged with these angelic beings coming down and joining the marriage bed. So there can be unions that we call marriage that are unpleasing to God, and it's best to stick with his design. Why? Well, because there's judgment. He sees this and then he judges. None of this is going to slip under the rug. So the second point is, God is judge, and he is right, and it is good to have judgment and in some cases moral outrage, and we'll see about that outrage tomorrow. Thanks for listening.